Ralph Russo joins us, theathletic.com. Thank you, buddy. Appreciate your time. So there wasn't a game full of a lot of bangers. There were a couple, three. But my goodness, Ralph, when Texas and Penn State go down, Clemson, those were three of the top four teams to start the year, and they're all out of the top 25.
Yeah, and all in big, big trouble when it comes to making the playoff, right? I mean, for Penn State, this was the year you were kind of building toward, right? You bring all these players back. Their build, their roster had a little bit of a feel of what we saw Ohio State do when it won the national championship, and what Michigan did when it won the national championship. Insofar as, again, a lot of veteran players who passed up the NFL and came back for one more shot. And, you know, I mean, James Franklin said this, and, you know, it's hard not to think that it played a big part. They played a good game against Oregon. They lost. That's what they tend to do. They tend to lose the big games, but they tend to never lose and get upset. They almost always take care of business, but you definitely felt like they just, you know, Penn State just got ambushed in a tough spot. Like, it was still lingering. The Oregon loss was still lingering, and it fell on them in a half empty, you know, Pasadena Rose Bowl there. They just couldn't bring the energy, and all of a sudden their usually reliable defense just fell totally flat. So that was a stunner. The Texas thing, they definitely got some issues in Texas, but Florida's pretty good. What happened with UCLA and Penn State, again, was just was absolutely shocking.
When it comes to James Franklin and how they're not for anybody who's watching going, well, they got to fire James Franklin. They're not firing James Franklin. That's not going to happen. What does he have to do to kind of top-down view why these things keep going wrong for him?
You know, it's a little bit of a mystery, but I shouldn't say that. If you look back at the coaches who tend to have the really good records in the big games, right? First of all, the can't win the big one tag. Bobby Bowden couldn't win the big one until he did. And Tom Osborne couldn't win the big one, and then he did. Mac Brown couldn't win the big one until he did. Generally speaking, what helps when you win the big one, and why Nick Saban generally always won the big one, and Kirby Smart for a little while couldn't win the big one, and now he does. What generally helps in winning the big one is having the better team, right? If you have the better team, when you come to the big one, you tend to win the big one. And the issue is, the core issue, I think, for Penn State has been it just can't quite get the recruiting to the level of Ohio State, maybe where Oregon is now. Now, again, you can blame James Franklin for that. There's probably some, you know, conditions that have to do with being in the middle of central Pennsylvania that have something to do with that. So, you know, we can talk about better play calling. We can talk about, does the team get tight because the coach get tight? I think all of those things are hard to quantify. What's a little easier to quantify is when you see Penn State's roster, even this year's team, as good as it is, if you think about it, it's the same team that they had last year, but without 2 first-round draft picks in Ty Warren and Abdul Carter. So maybe we were foolish to think, well, everybody else will get better, and the 2 most special players on the team, they won't miss as much, the 2 biggest difference makers. And so again, I don't necessarily have a solution for James Franklin. I do wonder if there comes a point, you've been there for 12 years, you're good at your job, Penn State's a good job, but maybe you'd be better off just both of you parting ways and doing something else. But that's real complicated too. You're right. They're not firing James Franklin, but you do find yourself wondering, in this environment, would they both be best trying something different?
Ralph, I mean, hyperbole and overreacting's the name of the game for what we do sometimes, but I threw this out there earlier. Would you take Texas Tech or the field in the Big 12 right now?
That's a good question. And, we just recorded our podcast with my guys at The Athletic, Bruce Feldman and Stu Mandel, and we had a similar discussion. I'll just say we had a similar discussion. You're right. I mean, the general consensus is you never know who's going to win the Big 12, right? You look for teams at the bottom that were, predicted to barely break even, and one of those teams is probably going to contend. It looks like Cincinnati might be that team this year that's suddenly going to go from the bottom of the conference to at least contention. But when you watch Texas Tech and the roster that they built, and I think we all had a little skepticism to let's see how it all comes together.
Sure.
That does look like a team that might be separating. And isn't that maybe, I know if you're a Big 12 fan, if you're Baylor, you don't want to think that. And if you're a TCU fan, you don't want to think that. Hell no, they're not. We can beat those guys. But in some sense, for the Big 12 globally, what you kind of need is a contender that not only can win the conference, but separate a little bit. Maybe win a playoff game or two. And it certainly looks like if there is a team in the Big 12 that can be that type of team, that isn't just the best team in the Big 12, but you could say, hey, is that the best team in the country? Or is that in the argument for the best team in the country? It certainly looks like Texas Tech is the most capable of being that right now.
Isn't that crazy? No, maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it's like that, but you don't think it doesn't seem like the Big Ten, although Indiana made the hot run last year. In the SEC, but the Big 12, you can count on a team that was probably picked 14th, 15th, or 16th, Arizona State, BYU. And then this year, I don't know how low Cincinnati was because we didn't do a poll, but I would have probably had them around 10 or 12, maybe. And it happens. And is it important? Let's say Tech is it. How important would it be for them to be really good, make a run, and then also do it over and over again?
So, yeah, you need to do it more than once. And I mean, that there's a bigger story there about the conditions with which the environment that they built this team in, right? In terms of where NIL is right now and revenue sharing, and whether that will still be the same environment next year. And you'll still be able to spend quite as much and spend it in the way they're spending it without, certain guardrails. So there's a legitimate question of whether they'll be able to build a team the same way going forward. And it's hard for me to answer that. Listen, they got the money. I mean, Cody Campbell has more than enough money to keep this thing going beyond 1 year, but it becomes how it's spent and things along those lines. I also would say like more micro than macro, whether they can keep doing it over several years, is the idea that are they so good this year that maybe it also creates an opportunity? Like, does it create an opportunity for the Big 12 to get a second team in? Because maybe Texas Tech is so good, somebody beats Texas Tech in a conference championship game or late in the regular season, and that's good enough to also lift that second team in. Or is Texas Tech so good it runs roughshod over the conference? Now, it's only played 2 games, but it has been very impressive in those 2 games. It runs roughshod over the conference, and by the time they're done, they're standing at the top of the podium, and everybody else doesn't look quite so impressive.
Ralph, is Mario Cristobal's now biggest weakness since he appears to have built the roster he wants, Mario Cristobal?
It's funny. I always found myself, when they were struggling a little bit in the early years, first year or two of Mario's build there, what I would tend to tell people is Mario is going to recruit his way out of this. Like that, we can question his game management. We can question this, the way he does that, the way he runs the team. My guess is in a couple of years, he will have recruited his way to a team that hides all his flaws in terms of game management and things along those lines. Now, I will say this. He does seem to be getting a little better at that other stuff in terms of just going for it a little more on 4th down, managing the clock, things along those lines. So maybe there's some improvements there. But it goes back to what I told you about, like, hey, the best way to win the big games is to come with the biggest, toughest, fastest players. That's what Miami's done. Like I will take the dummy with the good players over the genius with not as good players. And that's not to say Mario's a dummy. Just to be very clear, I'm not saying that. But if I'm taking the two extremes here, I'll take the guy who doesn't know how to manage the clock, but has a bunch of 320-pound offensive linemen who are going to get drafted in the first round. The Miami team looks really good, whether it's the number one team in the country or the number two team in the country. Tomato, tomato. But they certainly look like this Miami team certainly looks like a team that can contend for a national championship.
Yeah, Ralph, at the end of the game, they asked him about his decision to go for it on fourth down, which actually provided a better opportunity for FSU than kicking it or punting it or whatever he did. And he said, the card says to go for it. Throw away the card, Mario. Just throw it away, because I think he becomes so too reliant on it.
I can't remember that exact. I'm gonna push back a little bit here.
Yeah,
I think guys like Mario probably need to rely on the card a little more. And I mean that again, not to disparage him, but I think that I think you get into trouble a lot of times going with your gut. So I can't. I'm gonna punt on that overall because I can't remember the exact situation. And I think what they were trying to do is just end the game right then and there, understanding that Florida State probably didn't have enough time to even get two possessions. So I don't know if it was necessarily like the worst call of all, but nonetheless, again, get good players. Be a guy who understands how to recruit, how to acquire good players. That's the number one thing in college football that a certain coach we thought was a genius in the NFL seems to have forgotten over in North Carolina.
No doubt about that. Ralph, just like we all expected, preseason number one Texas out of the polls by the Red River shootout. Pretty crazy there. But in all seriousness, how are you approaching Oklahoma, Texas this weekend?
Oklahoma, Texas is a rivalry. Like, we know what we always say, throw the records out. Anything can happen with these two teams. And often that's not really true, right? Like Oklahoma and Oklahoma, Bedlam has proved over years and years that actually don't throw the records out. More often than not, Oklahoma is just going to win that game. And I think that's the case with a lot of rivalries, right? We overstate how much anything can happen. However, Red River's got a pretty good track record for the anything can happen element of the game. I remember covering a Red River rivalry shootout when, Charlie Strong was wearing the gold hat, right? And he got fired at the end of the year. And Mac Brown won his last Red River game, and he got fired at the end of the year. We get some weird results in this game. So with a backup quarterback for Oklahoma, most likely, and Michael Hawkins, with an offense that was a little wonky anyway. Even with Mateer, they were having a hard time running the ball. Like, I definitely could see Texas coming off the mat here. Now, you got a block for Arch, and that has been easy. And Oklahoma's pass rush is no joke. But I definitely sort of feel like this is one of those, like, oh, everybody's really high on Oklahoma and everybody's throwing dirt on Texas. And, it's, 7 p.m. and the fair, we're all going to the fair going, wow, I can't believe Texas won that game.
One more game, Indiana and Oregon. Indiana last year, well, that's so cute. And then even though it's like they got blown out by Notre Dame and they didn't, in the end, it was a normal football score. But here they are again, and Cignetti kind of likes to scoff at people, but they beat the hell out of Illinois, and now they get the test on the road.
Yeah, I'll be at that one. I'm heading out to Eugene. I'm
Good.
very much looking forward to it. So you can make an argument that Indiana might be better this season than it was last season. And that's as good as Curtis Rourke was for the Hoosiers last year. Fernando Mendoza is a dude who might be a first-round draft pick at quarterback. So you're upgrading at that position. They have a fair amount of the same guys back in terms of playmakers that they had last year. This thing hasn't been as good on the road, though. Against Iowa a couple of weeks ago, fits and starts, played well, came away with the win. Last year, I believe they went to the Big House against Michigan. Somebody's going to correct me if I'm wrong here. And that was a game that, not exactly a vintage Michigan game, but nonetheless came away with a win. Listen, they played Ohio State on the road last year, but that's Ohio State. I understand, like, a lot of road games aren't going to work out very well when you're going to visit the shoe. I just do wonder if Oregon has a little too much athletically, physically, because Oregon looks more like Ohio State, which beat Indiana last year. Oregon looks more like Notre Dame, which beat Indiana last year. As well as they execute, and as good as that team is, and as much as Coach Siggs, all his bravado, I do have a suspicion that this big game for Indiana ends up playing out a little more closely to what we saw from the Ohio State and Notre Dame games.
Ralph, we appreciate it, buddy. The top 25 preseason poll has taken a beating among the top 4 other than Ohio State. Man, it's you used to run it, and of course you've seen it before, but this is unbelievable in week number 6, headed to week 7. Thanks for your time. Enjoy Eugene. I bet you will.
Thank you. Yeah, it's what we like. We like a lot of this chaos. I don't mind being wrong with my picks. I want chaos and I want some fun stuff.
Absolutely.
Nobody likes chalk. Thanks, guys.